I'm charged with introducing two of our staff members. And this morning I was thinking of how to introduce them, okay? Well, we heard a lot about the history of the evaluation system, and had I not met Wade in 2000 at the BIF in Wichita, Kansas, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with either the Cornell system or the Balt system. So it's kind of nice. I really appreciate having had this opportunity. I look forward to doing more with these systems. But when Wade, when I did meet him, he was on his way back to CSU to finish up his PhD. He had sold his cow herd, and he was going to go back and start studying again with Bruce and Rick Borden and so on. And so he wanted to go see a girlfriend in California first. It wasn't Kathy here, but someone else. And so he charged me and some other people with driving his car back from Wichita to Fort Collins. Well, look at the car, and the tires completely bald, okay? So on our way back to Fort Collins, we were driving late at night. We were on I-70 near Lyman, Colorado. I was driving at about 90, and all of a sudden the tire blew. And I had, there were some other people in the car. We almost got killed thanks to these bald tires. One of the people in the car was Larry Keene, so we almost lost like the smartest guy I know. But anyway, so it's been a wild ride ever since. I started here in 2010. It's been a wonderful 8 years. I hope to keep doing it some more. I got hired in 2010 by Wade and Jerry at the time, and I didn't meet Steve until a few months after that, and I can't remember when I met him, but when I was kind of scared of him, and I kind of still am. And when I looked at Steve, he was looking how he's looking at me right now, and I thought, God, he looks like Spock. Yeah, so I think he's like Leonard Nimoy's younger brother. And indeed, he does come from the planet Vulcan. He earned degrees in mathematics and mechanical engineering from the Starfleet Academy. And he has been on the Starship Enterprise since 1973. That's 45 years. So, so now I'd like to introduce both Captain Kirk and Spock.
So I wish I could tell you that Lauren's story about my car wasn't true, but you guys know it's true. Anyway, so Spock is somebody I nicknamed Steve quite a while ago, and it wasn't necessarily, I didn't know that he looked so much like Leonard Nimoy, but he certainly acted like a Vulcan. On the surface, what's interesting about Steve, on the surface, is he seems completely devoid of emotion, but still waters run deep. There's plenty of emotion there. Anyway, and there's no question, Steve is the cornerstone of ASA. There's been no one in the history of ASA that has had more impact on our association than Steve McGuire. He served us for 45 years, and I can guarantee you, every one of those years, he's operated at one of the highest levels of productivity imaginable. Steve McGuire is the cornerstone of ASA. And so anyway, Steve reluctantly agreed to do this. One of the things, so I asked Steve for a list of questions, so that the game plan here is for me, and we've done this for 15 years now. We sit around the office, and I ask Steve questions, and he about the history of ASA and about how this happened and what happened back then. And so I asked Steve to give me a list of questions that he wants me to ask. He didn't return any questions. So the way I take that is nothing's off limits. So the first question I'm going to ask is something I've always wanted to know, and it has perplexed me from the time I met Steve. Steve McGuire, how did you get that wonderful woman to put up with you for so many years? It's almost 50 years. See, he's not going to answer that. Because there is no answer. It's just a miracle. So anyway, seriously, we're here to talk about the history of ASA with somebody who lived the history of ASA. I guess I'll start with Steve really did not give me a list of questions, and I asked him to, so he's gonna have to answer whatever I throw out because he didn't put up his own list. But anyway, there's a story. Steve has told a story, and many of you probably heard it, about how Steve was hired. How did you come to ASA? Back when Don hired you, I know that, so tell us the story about how that all went.
First, I have to tell you that first time I met Wade was over the phone, and he had.
Tell you he didn't like me very much.
You'll all be surprised about this, but he was explaining how the deviations within a contemporary group all had to add up to 0. And I've never did any of that, but he gave me a lecture right on the phone first time I met him, and he's been doing that ever since.
That was a long time before I was working here. Since then, it's been all good. Love fest.
So, I went to college at a small liberal arts school in Michigan, and I went there to play football. I played football through college, small-time football. When I graduated, I taught school for 2 years, math and science, and coached football, and kind of decided that really wasn't my calling. And so I got married, and my wife and I decided, well, for a couple of years, I'm going to go back to school, get a technical, more technical degree, and let's get out of the Midwest. I wrote to about 6 schools that had decent reputations for engineering, and I got this little pamphlet back from Montana State that said nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, and is this college, and that's the only place I applied and moved out here. Hadn't been too long out here, and we realized that the jobs weren't real plentiful, and so my wife had a minimum wage job, and we ran short on our savings was depleting. And I was riding in the car one noon, and a new employment report came over on the radio and said that there's a company in town looking for a person with some computer experience. I was in school, and I had just signed up for my Computers for Engineers class. And so I said, oh, okay, I must have some experience. I didn't have any idea what I was going to, but I think I called them up, and I called the employment company up, and they sent me to the Simmental office, which is up close to campus at that time. And I walked in. Now, I had taught school for 2 years, and we moved out in September, but the previous June was my last day of teaching. And after that was over with, I went right to the barber or the haircut place, and I got a buzz. Okay, so now fast forward about 9 months, I hadn't shaved or gotten a haircut. and I walked into the Simmental office, and everybody's in cowboy boots and jeans and big belt buckles. And every person in that place stopped and looked when I walked in. And I did the same because I thought I had the wrong place. But actually I talked to a couple of people, and the one person that was I was going to work with, he was going to show me how to do some things was really good, and we had a great conversation. I was just fascinated by everything he was talking about, cattle records and that sort of thing. And then fortunately, I came home that night and I told my wife that, that's not going to work out. And fortunately, the only other person that came in was a guy with a ponytail down his back, so I got the job. Simmental had just converted over to their records over to Boeing Computer Services, and the previous August, September, now we're into April, 1st of April, and Boeing had put together this whole system, and so Simmental would send punch cards to Boeing, and Boeing would take them, load them into their system, and send back certificates and herd reports. And then they also sent back this stack of computer reports of errors in herds that they couldn't process. And so starting in about August, the crew would go through and they'd get the herd reports and the certificates, and they'd send them all up, and they'd take the error reports and stack them in a stack, because they didn't know how to read them. Nobody knew how to read them. And so if you had a herd that had an error, you didn't get your certificates or your herd reports. And it was a slow process. People breeders would call, and we'd pull out, or they'd pull out the reports and see if they can't figure something out. But it wasn't very formalized, and so that's what I was supposed to do for 3 months. They hired me to go through these error reports, and it took me a little while to figure out what the cryptic messages meant and that sort of stuff. But to tell you the truth, once you figured that out, it's pretty easy. And you found out that they typed the weaning, the year of the weaning weight was before the year of birth, and so you just go in there and you change that 72 to a 73, and you send the herd report or the punch cards back to Boeing, and you get certificates the next time. So I just worked through that, and as a lot of those things go, if you don't know anything about it, you think the person that does it is a whiz, and so everybody thought I was a whiz, but really. And so I was coming to the end of my 3 months, and I started looking around for a summer job, and there were some road construction crews that were being built, and I thought I'd get involved in that and so I could make some money over the summer. And Don came down to my desk or the office where I was working, and he said, "You're staying the summer. We're putting you on salary for the summer." And that's what started. I went. I did 2 more years. I had 2 more years engineering, and I finished that up. And then we were planning on going back to Michigan, and Simmental said, "We got a couple of these projects we'd like you to finish up on." And so I stayed for a couple of years, and that's turned into 45.
So the title of our talk is From Airplanes to Video Games. And so Bruce intimated in his presentation about the video game end of things. We've evolved to where we're using the same thing these kids that play these games. We're using that, leveraging that to make genetic progress. But on the other end of that spectrum, the airplanes, and Steve touched on it very briefly about Boeing airplane had Boeing computer, and I found this out through talking to Steve and listening to his story. So tell me a little bit about those early days with Boeing computer.
So Don should add some of this to this, but Don, long before I was there, Don knew that he wanted to have a much more robust, professional databasing system, because he wanted to do a genetic evaluation. And so, as I remember it, he wrote out to about half a dozen companies saying, "Here's what we want, and we want you to do it." And only one replied, and Boeing said, "Hey, I think we can do this." Boeing, as part of their airplane operation, had a computer division, and they built a quite sophisticated databasing system to keep track of airplane parts. And they tracked airplane parts and locations, and what pieces went with what what parts went together for each unit that they built and that sort of thing, and they adapted that to cattle records. So they had an airplane parts was the major key into their database, and that became a registration number for our system. And then it just went down, and so when you had a Siren Dam kind of matched into a masterpiece for an airplane part, and all the progeny were the pieces that went into that airplane, make that masterpiece. And so there was some logic in how they built the thing, and it was fascinating to kind of figure out how all that fit together. But Boeing really did a good job for us, and we got the better end of that deal, I can tell you that. Here we got a huge company, and Simmental just plugged into some of their resources, and we weren't really very big. In their revenue stream, we weren't a very large portion of it, but it worked out really well. I remember, and Boeing they treated us just like any customer. I mean, we had a sales rep, we had technical people assigned, and I remember meeting with the Boeing people one time, and Don brought out a sheet, at least a page and a half of problems that they needed to fix right now because they didn't do it the way that it's supposed to be done. and you know, all credit to Boeing, they just did it like we were a big customer of theirs. So that was kind of fun, and that was a good relationship right into the 1980s. They actually formed a group that at one time did eight or nine of the breed associations, just after the pattern that they had built for Simmental. Two things happened in the early 80s. Their airplane parts key was 6 characters long, and we were moving into registration number 1 million. And so some adjustments would have to be made. And then finally, Boeing finally looked at these breed associations and looked at their other customers, and they're a Fortune 500 company, and they said, you know, we line up better with other Fortune 500 companies rather than these little breed associations. And so they were very gracious in helping us convert over to a system that we're using now. They also did, and one of the main reasons that Don wanted to work with a bigger company is they had the computer power, which by today's standard is pretty minimal, but they had the computer power to do a genetic evaluation on, I can't remember, it was a CDC 6600 or something like that. They always, but they had a scientific computer set up for the genetic evaluation.
So that was the first databasing system. Then what happened? So you said they basically outgrew us, essentially. Would that be a fair statement? They didn't want to work with the little fish. Is that?
Yeah. They didn't want to, and they would have to make changes to their databasing system to accommodate the 1 million registration.
So what happened then?
So we decided at that time that we'd bring our operation in-house, and computers were starting to come down in price. We could get what they call mini computers or mid-sized computers for something we could afford, and so we built an in-house system. We kind of worked with the Boeing structure in how they had laid things out, and hired an outfit to convert to an in-house system, which we did in '83, if I reckon correct, and we registered the millionth animal in '84.
So I remember when I actually came, we were using canned software system called DataPoint.
Yeah, well, DataPoint is the company that is a computer company that we got our computers from. and they had a proprietary operating system. DataPoint was originally formed from 2 Boeing employees. And so while we were with Boeing, Boeing recommended we look at this computer company that these Boeing employees had, and they had a software package. So we actually had our accounts receivable, accounts payable, and payroll on a software package from this company, and that's kind of how we got started with DataPoint. So then when we were going with an in-house system, it was very natural to look at DataPoint because we had all this experience with them.
So I'm going to bring up a word that probably a lot of you have heard many times and can relate to. What is it? Herd handler. Herd handler. How many in here know what that means? A lot have used it, yeah. There is a difference between knowing what it means and using it too. Anyway, looks like a lot of you used herd handler. Tell us about the evolution of herd handler.
Well, first you have to go back to the formation of that term. Herd handler used to be a series of forms, paper forms. We had, at the beginning, we had, when I first started, a program called Smile, and you can read about that in the books that Don put together. And then later on, he was thinking that we needed to have a new, upgraded version. And as I think he tells it, he was listening to a Campbell Soup ad about the manhandlers. They had this, and he came up with, he said, we need something like that, let's call it the herd handler. So he put the herd handler with the set of paper forms that we had. And so then when we got into the late 80s, we had some different forms for members and you guys to send records to us electronically on little diskettes and that sort of thing. We decided we'd expand that and we'd have a full-fledged ranch management package that we sold. And we put that together and we named that the herd handler software. That was patterned after the herd handler. We had weaning sheets and yearling sheets or forms within the software package. But one of the things that we did decide to do as we were planning that is, we said, wouldn't it be nice if everybody had access to the database rather than just keeping the database in the office? So we released the herd handler software on a CD that had the entire database on it, so people could do EPD searches and herd searches. Now we restricted it the way we've always restricted it. You couldn't go, you didn't have unlimited access to other people's records. But when you signed up, you got a passcode that told the system who you were and you had access to your own records, and then general records on the breed and pedigree information and EPD information. And that was I think it was revolutionary software, but we didn't have a customer base that could support such a sophisticated software package. You needed to, when you build an Excel type application, you need to sell it to hundreds of thousands to be able to keep maintaining it and that sort of thing. And we didn't have that many members that needed that.
So like I said, when I first came, we had herd handler, DataPoint, and then pretty major evolution occurred. And what necessitated that, and what was that evolution?
I've got no idea what you're talking about.
That's usually the response I get out of Steve. So there's a major transition that went on, and Steve was in the middle of that, of course.
So this software package that we put together that got in '84 lasted up until all the way through to 2007. But we knew that there was no internet capabilities in that system. And so we knew that we had to open it up to make it, even though we had this herd handler software package, we were sending out on CDs. We only sent it out 2 times a year, and in between times, all that data was still housed in the association, not readily available to members. And everybody, the whole world was opening up to the internet, and you could do things on the internet. We knew we had to go in that direction. The data point system we had really wasn't. We could have patched something together, but it wasn't going to be the final solution. And so we went to our herd book online system that we have today.
So, at one time when it came to software development and databasing, you were pretty much the one-man show. Now we have a number of programmers. Tell us about how we got from point A to B. Don't say I don't know what you're talking about.
So back in the days with the data point, even though I liked that system and it served us very well, it was not a sophisticated system. When you go to an internet-based system, you got to have a sophisticated system. You got to worry about traffic coming in and going out. You got to worry about security. You got to worry about those kinds of things. So associated, we hired actually a subsidiary of the Holstein Friesian Association to build the framework for our internet system. But we only, and to convert the database into an industry standard database that would fit our new internet system. But they only gave us a framework, and we had to actually build a lot of the code to do the rest of the stuff. And that's fairly sophisticated, not something that was my training or strength, or although I knew a lot about the concepts, I wasn't that kind of a programmer, and so we needed to hire some serious folk to work on that.
So you made a decision, rather than use an off-the-shelf databasing system, or I shouldn't say off-the-shelf, a licensed databasing system that is supported by some major corporation, you opted to use what's called open source. What went into that decision-making process?
Some of it was bias. I just too often I've got involved with canned programs that you just couldn't get into it and customize it the way you wanted it. You just couldn't adapt it the way you wanted it. And so some of it was bias. Some of it was you can do so many things if you've got some talented people with less expensive software than software that has it's expensive because it has lots of features, and many of those features you don't need. And so we just kind of slowly worked our way down to a customized solution. And at the same time, there's a whole world out there that we were not really aware of when we started the search, of open source software that is out there that you can use, that is just as good as commercial software. And so people were paying in the tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars, well, into the tens of thousands or 100,000 a year in licensing fees to commercial operations. And we thought maybe we could spend that money better if we went open source, where there was not licensing fees to many of these products. And so we kind of patched together, with the help of the Holstein Friesian Association, an open source system that we're not paying exorbitant licensing fees. Now, when we need to have a product to plug in, or a solution to plug in, we're not afraid to do that with appropriate software rather than developing it ourselves. But for the most part, our system has been self-developed.
So that kind of covers the databasing, the evolution of databasing at ASA, and that's an absolute critical component to genetic evaluation. Bruce Golden back there will tell you, and Lauren, and anyone involved in genetic evaluation, databasing is an absolute critical component to evaluation. But Steve's also been involved all the way along when it comes to the genetic evaluation system. And so I'd like to get your sense from all the way back to when Don Vanneman pushed through the first sire summary in '71. John alluded to that. A guy named Paul Miller was involved in that. I'd like to hear about the view of that from Steve McGuire.
I'm gonna not answer that right away. I want to go back to the databasing. There's a couple of things that we decided when we put our internet system together that we wanted to have. And one of them is we wanted to have a system that people could access 24 hours a day. We wanted to have a system that people could pay without involving the staff, calling the staff up, sending a check. We wanted to be able to take care of that. And we wanted members to be able to enter their own data. So the ramifications of that, it wasn't immediate, but when we put that system together, the ramifications are pretty impressive. 92% of the data that goes into our database is entered by members directly into our online system. 67% of the money we collect comes through credit cards entered when they submit their data. So that means a check's not sent to the association doesn't have to log that check in, stamp the back of it, take it down to the bank. It just automatically flows through the credit card system. Almost 99% of all the THE enrollments come through that system. What it has done is it allows you to register an animal on Sunday afternoon and get the registration certificate in 10 minutes. Not the certificate, but the number, and see the records and the EPDs. It allows staff to concentrate on issues that need to be resolved rather than entering all the data. So it's had a tremendous impact on how we do business. And it's really leveraged all the resources. All right,
Just wait though. So go. Let's stay on that track. So I've heard you've told me about when it came to databasing back in the old days, the first floor of the old building was pretty much filled up with people putting in data. And how many? What kind of numbers are you talking?
I don't know if any. I know a lot of you have been in the old building in the Simmental Association, but we moved into that building in '74, and we moved 55 people into that building, and we didn't have a register staff at that time. So these are all processing people, and it was wall-to-wall desks and telephones and that sort of thing. I don't think we've ever had that many people since, as we've kind of automated more and more things. We've never had that many people.
I had to check with the boss about the timeline here. So as I said, one of the obviously a critical component of genetic evaluation is databasing, and Steve's been in the middle of that from day one. And so when it comes to genetic evaluation, day one was 1971. How did you view that from your perspective?
I wasn't there then.
You weren't, that's right. He wasn't there.
I can tell you that almost, even as a part-time person that, going to school, almost from day one when I started with Simmental and found out kind of feel for what was going on. 1971 SAR summary was, everybody talked about it in the office. It was a big deal even to everybody in the office. And then over the next few years, I remember spending many, many nights with Don and Kate there, and cutting and pasting the photo shots of every bull that was going to be in the next sire summary. We made camera-ready sheets. We had to cut and paste with, you know, the evaluation data to print out here, the name would print out in another report, and the member would print out with their address. Not, you know, you cut, you paste, you position, and then somebody doesn't get something right, so you swear and you pull it off and you put it around, and then of course Bannerman would, you know, he may not seem like it, but if things aren't lined up exactly right, you're going to do it over. And so, yeah, we did, but it was a big deal. I mean, genetic evaluation from the time I started there was a big deal. I mean, it was the, you know, it drove a lot of the activities around the association. Another thing I might mention is, now again, as just a part-time employee who wasn't really planning on staying there, I just ran across at my home a stack of books that had the Battle of Bull Run. Don gave me a copy just as a part-time employee. He says, you ought to read this. So that's it.
So in the name of expediency, we're going to kind of skip probably a couple decades and go to what, well, John Pollock, I think, correctly referred to it, and I do myself when I talk about this thing we call IGS, this collaboration we have with all these breed associations, the biggest genetic evaluation in the world in beef cattle. I think it's fair to say it was got its roots with the multi-breed genetic evaluation that was published in 97. That'd be right. Yeah, the multi-breed ICE, International Cattle Evaluation, ICE, MB ICE. So anyway, I'd like your take on that period of time, how that all came together, and how that jettisoned us to where we're at today.
I'm not sure I followed your question, but I do have some comments. One, when Hans Grasser came to the Simmental Association in the early 80s, I was in that meeting, and I know there was just this buzz, and John has kind of alluded to it, but we asked the question of Hans Grasser, where did he, you know, how did he put it all together? And he said, well, these two guys just wrote this paper, and I just followed what they put in the paper. I mean, it was just kind of a matter of fact. He said, I just followed what the paper outlined. It was such an, kind of a, in retrospect, such an innocent answer to that question. He didn't think it was a big deal. He didn't act like it was a big deal, although he knew it was important, and he was pretty proud of his work. But he just said, well, I just followed what they told me to do. But also said, Dr. Pete Berthning was at Montana State University at that time, and he was in on that meeting, and he mentioned to Earl Peterson. He says, you know, you might think about contacting Cornell because they might be interested in working with you on a genetic evaluation. It's interesting to see that from the other end, the same thing happened. Both times, I suspect Earl wasn't all that excited. First message, first time he heard about it, he thought what we had at the time was doing a decent job, and we should stay with it. But it didn't take him long to get to fall in line. But I did get, Earl went skiing, if I remember correctly. Earl went skiing when we were supposed to meet with Cornell, and he wrenched his shoulder. And so he said, Steve, you need to go to this meeting in Chicago where these guys from Cornell are going to explain why we should go with it, have them develop a new system. So I went in, and again, it was a fun meeting. It was an exciting meeting just to think about all of the improvements that could be made. So that kind of got us going, and we sent them a database. not long after arrangements got made, and Mauricio Elzo took that database and started doing things with it. And he used to call me every 2-3 weeks and ask me about this or ask me about that, and what this meant, and how do we keep this record and that sort of stuff. So that was fun.
Mauricio was a postdoc at the time.
Yep.
At Cornell. Yep.
He's the initial postdoc that got hired in the project.
So I know, so moving into the multi-breed evaluation, which I think is fair to say was the genesis of IGS, I don't think we could be doing what we're doing with all the breeds and databases we are now without the multi-breed database, obviously. And I know Gordon was a strong champion, and also Willie. They were partners in crime at the time. They both were on the board. And from the stories I heard, that's way, way beyond my time. I'm much younger. But anyway, I know that they were champions of the multi-breed evaluation. And I guess I'm curious if you could give us, just kind of the climate. What was the climate at that time that brought about this, what would seem like a crazy idea, I would think, in a lot of breed associations? Why in the world would you care about evaluating other breeds?
And I'm not sure we cared about evaluating other breeds.
That's another problem with Steve. He's too damn honest.
I mean, the impetus was to do a better job with percentage cattle. But about that same time, Mark always, Meat Animal Research always produced these breed contrast charts. And we put a chart together that showed at weaning, Simmental crossbreds had a 40-pound advantage over straight-bred Angus and this and that. And I remember a meeting where Gordon said, if we did a better job with our multi-breed, we proved that we had better cattle than other breeds. And they argued about whether that's true or not. But that kind of got started in thinking that we're not doing as good a job with the percentage cattle as we should be doing, and then that got pushing that can't that something be done, and then that translated into confronting John about it, and that's how we got started with that. John, you might have been talking about making multiple breeds involved in this from the beginning, but I never was in a conversation with the board. They talked about that. As a matter of fact, when we started producing EPDs on purebred bulls of another breed, all the board members stepped back and said, oh, this can do that. And really what the multi-breed change did is it made breeding, the genetic evaluation agnostic to breed. For a breed association to put together an evaluation that was agnostic to breed, that was revolutionary. But I don't think we realized it at the time. It kind of grew on us over time that, oh, you can do that. And then, of course, we were approached by 2 smaller breeds, but they said, hey, can you do ours? I don't know that we could have said, oh yeah, your data, well, we can do that, it doesn't matter. I think we had to think about, well, can we really do that? Is that because it was outside what we thought the purpose of our genetic evaluation was, is to for Simmental cattle. And so it kind of expanded that whole thing. And it's been a slowly evolving thing. And I always compare it to other breeds, because I think Simmental, because of the multi-breed evaluation, has had 10 or more years of kind of getting a handle on crossbreds and other breeds and the value of other breeds and how you should be mixing and matching and all those kinds of things. There's a lot of breeds that are still struggling with that. That I think Simmental, not completely, but is ahead of the game in terms of seeing the value of incorporating all different breeds.
So we'll fast forward here with my last question. And So now we're to the point where we're leveraging video games. We're leveraging cards that are utilized in video games to do genetic evaluation, a whole new generation of software, quantum leaps beyond where we were. That required a huge evolution in the way we addressed the flow of information into our system. And I guess Bruce talked to that to some degree, but I'd like to get it from your vantage point. Bruce mentioned that you thought maybe it couldn't be done. I don't know that I ever saw that. One thing Steve is he's maybe blissfully sometimes you don't realize really the challenge ahead. No, I'm not saying he usually realizes the challenge ahead, but I don't know that he's ever seen one that he doesn't think he can lick. But so take us through the last few years, and I know a lot of you were out there waiting for this to happen, and it was like, my God, when is this going to happen? It's just, it's not happening. It's not happening. Well, it did happen, and this man right here had a lot to do with it. So how did that all evolve?
So, Simmental did their genetic evaluation. We did genetic evaluation with Canada, and then we brought 2 other breeds in. And in each of those cases, we were doing genetic evaluation twice a year, and the outside groups would send a dump of their data, and I'd put it together and send it off to Cornell. Then we brought the system in-house, but it was the same system that ran at Cornell. We just ran it on computers in Simmental Association, and we started doing genetic evaluation for other breeds, and so they dump data to us twice a year, and then I'd go through it and kind of match it up and make sure that all the data was right. Well, you keep doing the same thing over time. So the same data set that came from one association, you had to do the same corrections to theirs to line it up to go in the evaluation each time, and that got to be kind of repetitive, and it certainly couldn't be done very much more than twice a year. It was just too intensive and too manual to do it that way. So when we went to Bolt and we knew we were going to do it weekly, or that was the goal, we had to come up with a system that was much more automatic. So what we did is we just pushed back all of the formatting requirements back to each association, and we told them, you have to send your data this way to us. And rather than send it as like through email or through some other method, we put an internet site up where they just go to the internet and they just send it to us over the internet, so it didn't require somebody to actually grab onto it and process it. Just went over the internet right into our system, and it processes. The thing that makes it nice is that as soon as the data is sent by an association, it's automatically run through the system, and all of the records that do not pass, that the system says these aren't good records, then it's sent back to the association. The association has to fix those records and then resend it. And all the good records that they send in automatically go in to a database that is used to generate the data for the genetic evaluation. So that system, making sure that we've got the right layout, making sure each of the associations are sending the data correctly, that took some time to work through all those cycles to fine tune it and get it working. But now that it's working, it works very nice.
Well, I guess with that we'll close. Anybody know what that signal is? Know what that is? That's Vulcan for live long and prosper. So, Steve? We have time for
Anyone have any questions? Okay, I'd like to kind of relate one story about Steve. I was working for the Limousine Association at the time, and there was a meeting with all kinds of beef breeds trying to form something similar to IGS at the time. This was in the mid-2000s. And we all met, and there was a facilitator there, and he had us all go around the room saying what we hope to accomplish. You know, what kind of, goals we were going to come out with this meeting. It was all like kind of touchy-feely, like kind of like, oh, we're going to go holding hands, skipping through a meadow by the time we're done. But they come to Steve, and he goes, this isn't going to work. Just left it at that. Yeah, so he was real positive with that one, and that one didn't work. But that's kind of how Steve is. He just, it's very matter of fact. So any questions?